Mình Hôm qua mai.
Okay. So hello everyone and welcome back to week 4 of Java Server Pages. We have talked a great deal about servlets, not very much, but little bit about their life cycle. We know the basics of JSP, and today we're going to continue with JSP basically. Okay, so that's great. Everybody can hear me. If there are any questions during the class at any time, please do not hesitate to interrupt me or ask me questions. I will be happy to answer your questions and clear your doubts. Okay, that's fine. That's all right. Please do not type anymore. Please do not type anymore. That's fine. So let's just get into the material that we are going to discuss today, and we will see if anybody has questions later on. Okay, please stop typing yes on QQ so we can start the class. Okay, so what did we discuss in the last week? Anybody remembers what was the main discussion in the last week? Anybody remembers? Let me see. Okay, you're just saying yes, but you're not saying anything else. That's all right. So let me just start typing, make this a bit smaller. So if there are any problems, please let me know. So please kindly stop typing yes messages on QQ. That's fine. So in the last week, we talked about the life cycle of JSP and Java Server. We talked Java Server Pages. We talked about how the container, right? We talked about how the container, the web container, handles the request. And we actually learned that when we have a JSP, the container will actually take several steps. And in the end, the JSP that we write, it ends up being a servlet, right? With the help of the container, of course. So I gave you one homework. You had your first homework. Thank you for submitting it on time. Your homework 1, you had to create a dynamic page and display the local time of 5 countries. Thank you for doing that. Please, one thing I need to remind you, please keep the Java and .xml files, okay? Because later on I will ask you again to attach it to your final homework, okay? You will have to attach it to your final homework assignment, actually. So please do not throw it away, okay? Don't throw it away. Keep it in your system, okay? We will need it again in the future. Keep it there. Some of you asked me questions about homework 1. Some of you had troubles to run Apache Tomcat. Some of you had problems with your web.xml file. Some of you had problem with the codes. Like for example, there were some students asking me if it's okay for a page to be static. Okay. And the answer was, of course, no, because we talked about dynamic pages, right? So we know dynamic page is a page that changes, and this is exactly what I asked for for your homework. So basically, you had to display the local time, which changes every second. Other than that, I think pretty much everything else was all right. So let me just get to the material that we are going to discuss today. All right. Okay, so we're talking a little bit more about JSP. Okay. Um, One question that I would like you to consider, and this is something that I think we discussed last week, perhaps briefly, and that is the disadvantages of servlets. Okay, so I guess my question is, what are the problems of writing servlets alone? Okay, if you're not writing JSP, what are the problems? What are the disadvantages of writing servlets? Anybody knows the answer? Or you can rephrase this to ask, why do we need JSP? Okay. No, but I need an answer now, not just yes or no. What are the disadvantages of servlet and why do we need JSP? Either or. These questions are somehow related. So I can give you a hint, just help you out a little bit, to remind you that we use the response object to. Oh, is there a problem with the network now? Any problem with the network? Um, is the screen gone? Is there any problem with the network? Okay, so thank you for letting me know. Okay, I'm glad the network is back. So we go back to the question, what are the problems with servlets? So remember, what is a servlet? Servlet is just a Java class that extends, right? It's a Java class that extends HTTP servlet, right? So when we create web applications using servlet, there is a problem. And just to remind you, we use the response object, right? Response object to get or to write HTML to the client, right? So for example, we say, let's say our writer object is called OUT. We say OUT dot println, and then we write HTML inside it, right? So what do you think is the problem with this? Is it okay to go on and write HTML inside Java, or might we face some problems? Anybody knows?
So difficult.
Is it difficult? What is difficult?
Don't like HTML. Is not simple.
Okay, but the problem is that writing HTML inside Java is not, as you said, is not maybe very convenient. We might actually make mistakes. We might leave lots of errors, especially when it comes to things like, forward slash and backslash and quotes and double quotes. If we leave an extra or if we leave a special character without escaping it, the compiler will throw tons of errors. And the other problem is that the programmer has to know about web design. Okay, this is not really ideal because we want the programmer, the Java programmer, to only focus on writing Java, right? This is what ideally we want to do. We don't want our servlet programmers to be concerned with HTML, and many of them may not be good at it. Okay, so if you're only relying on servlets, you will face this particular problem. Okay, so as a programmer, you may not know how to change the background color or how to lay out your web page, or how to do things like CSS and a style sheet and so on. Okay, so therefore, using JSP gives us an option to do the opposite. In JSP, we write Java inside HTML, and we will see how that works. So when you're writing JSP, um, there are different ways and there are different actually syntaxes that you can use to write JSP, and the container will actually understand those different syntaxes and will convert it ultimately into a servlet file. So what we have in JSP, and this is the first thing that we will actually practice, we will see how it works, is JSP syntax. Okay, that is probably, I can say, it's the simplest way to write Java in an HTML page using JSP syntax. Later, we will learn about Java Bean, which is, I think, we have talked about it briefly. It's again a special Java class that uses methods to access properties, like we use getters and setters. We have expression language and we have JSTL. It's a tag library. We will discuss them later. For now, we will focus on JSP syntax. And on the other hand, there are many ways to write servlets. To use servlets, we can combine them with JSP. We can actually use servlet config and servlet context. It's something that we will discuss later. But most importantly, when it comes to a web application, learning about an MVC design is of great importance. This stands for Model View Controller, and this is the way that we can actually separate a design from the logic, from the business logic. We will talk a lot about this towards the end of the course. And then, of course, we will discuss and see how sessions work and why do we use them. So let's start with JSP syntax and JSP implicit objects, which is basically the topic of this session. Implicit objects are you can also call them predefined variables. These are the variables, predefined variables that are available when you write JSP. Okay, so on the left, you can see there are 9 objects, and these objects are available to you when you write a JSP code. So for example, in Servlet, if you remember, we have to create an object of type printWriter in order to have access to this. But in JSP, you don't need to create an object. This object is already available. So you can start writing JSP by using these objects without creating them. Now, every single object here has a different purpose and they have a different scope, okay? And we will go through them later on. We will see what is the purpose of an application object, what is the purpose of config, exception, and other objects, okay? So what we learned last week was that these steps that a JSP file go through in order to be able to serve a request that comes from a client. Okay, so first of all, the first stage in the life cycle of a JSP is translation. Anybody remembers what translation means here in the life cycle of a JSP? This is something that the container does to your JSP. And what it is, it's the translation of Java code inside JSP to a Java file. So basically, all the Java codes that you have written inside your JSP will be converted or actually translated to a separate Java file. Okay, so basically the container separates out the Java code from your HTML and creates a Java file. In the next stage, the container will actually compile your Java file, the one that had been translated from JSP. During this stage, translation, if there are any syntactical errors with JSP, the container will notify you about them. During this stage, compilation, if there are any Java syntactical errors, they will be thrown. Initialization is the step where the init method of your JSP will be called. Then during execution, we receive requests. So basically we will be here, the container will call the service method. We talked about service method, and the service method looks at the URL. It checks whether the request is for a get method or for a post method or for other HTTP methods. And according to the name of the method, the HTTP method, it calls either doGet, doPost, etc. Finally, when you shut down your web server, maybe you need to shut it down to free up spaces or to actually store some information, save some data, but mostly to free up more spaces, or if there are any problems, like unexpected problems with your server, this method will be called in the end, which is basically the last stage in the life cycle of a JSP. So in a simpler word, this is what actually happens. Somebody writes a JSP file. The JSP file will be sitting there in your web server. The container reads the web.xml file, okay? But it doesn't do anything at this stage with the JSP until there is a first request. So basically your JSP will be sitting on the server until there is a first request. We just talked about this is the translation stage where JSP is converted to a Java file, you can see, right? So if I ask you this question, what will be the new name of the after the translation? This is how the container changes the original name, right? It adds JSP postfix, right? A suffix with a Java extension. Okay. And in the next step, the third step, that which will be the compilation, we will have the Java class compiled into a .class file. And then the class will be loaded, right? And as soon as the init method of your JSP is called, you can say that your JSP file, which has now turned into a servlet, can accept requests and can respond back to the client. In other words, the object is now a full-fledged servlet. It's ready to accept client requests, okay? And finally, the container is going to call the JSP service, and the container actually spends most of the time calling the JSP service during the life cycle of a JSP. And this is the API, the interfaces that we have. We have seen the interfaces for servlet. This is for JSP. So on the very top, we have an interface called JSP page. You can override these methods, but you cannot override the service method. Okay. Well, basically, the way you can remember it is the ones that start with this hyphen underscore, they're telling you not to override me. Okay, so this is how you can remember it. Okay, so you can see that this is the time when the service method of JSP is called, where the JSP handles client requests. This is a very simple example of a JSP, and this basically is called JSP syntax. All you need to do is to have this kind of opening with this percentage sign. And inside this, you can write your Java codes. And as I told you before, out is an implicit object here, right? You don't need to define this or declare it before. You can simply start using it because this object is basically predefined for you. Yeah, so you can say in the end a JSP is just a servlet because the container goes through several steps to translating and converting your JSP into full-fledged servlet. Okay. This slide is showing you how the JSP has evolved over time. How actually, yeah. So at the beginning, we only had servlets. Then we had scriptlets and expressions, and these are basically ways to write JSP. Okay. So we will discuss what scriptlets are, what expressions are, but these are referring to JSP. Again, standard actions are another way, a newer way you can say, to write JSP, to create web applications. And then we had EL, expression language. We are going to cover scriptlets, expressions, standard editions, expression language, also Java standard tag libraries. So this is how the evolution actually unfolded. Then we had custom tag libraries. We will discuss them as well. And a newer technology, Velocity or FrameMaker, that we will also discuss about. So let's start with JSP syntax. We have scriptlets. We just talked about them. Scriptlets are ways to write Java codes. This is the syntax. Any Java code can go inside here. Then we have declarations. Declarations, if you want to declare a variable, if you want to declare a method, you can use this format. We will see how this works. Expressions are also an interesting way to write something to the client. Okay, we will see how expression syntax makes it easier to write HTML to the client. We will discuss directives. Okay, we have 3 different types of directives: page directive, include directive, tag, lib directive. So these basically provide some information to the compiler, to the container, about your JSP page. For example, you can use a page directive to import some packages, right? The way you used to do in Java was very simple. On the very top, you can actually import packages. And then we will talk about standard action elements. This is a bit more advanced, but we will see how standard action elements make it even easier to create web application using JSP. Okay, so I just want to give you a very quick demo of how to send parameters, how to send and actually display parameters to the client. For that, we will use JSP as well. But before I do that, one thing I wanted to tell you about is how to use Eclipse, okay, which is an IDE. It's a development toolkit that is very popular. There are other ones. I think you might be familiar with IntelliJ IDE or NetBeans, etc. I don't know which one you are familiar with, or I don't know if you have ever used any of these, but my preference is Eclipse. If you have used other IDEs, it's fine. You can use your favorite IDEs, but in this course, I will show my demos from now on using Eclipse. So what you need to do to get Eclipse is actually very simple. You can just go to your favorite search engine and type download Eclipse. that should take you to the official Eclipse website. Eclipse is an open source application which you can download freely. It's a great application. You can install the latest one. Okay. You can either download this one here, and this will help you to pick the right package. I usually prefer to see which packages are available. An important note, please do not download this version. Okay, because this version is for Java developers. You cannot develop a web application using this version. So you need to have an enterprise Java and web developers edition. And using this, you can create web application. So please download this one depending on your operating system. I already have my Eclipse. I don't need to download it, but the download and installation of Eclipse is very simple. You need to have Java, but you already have installed Java on your system, so you shouldn't have any problems. Please just go ahead, download this for this week. So what I'm going to do is I will open my Eclipse. I will just say launch. Just tell you the important things. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Okay, so the first thing I need to mention is how to create a project. So you can see I have plenty of projects that I have created before, and they're listed on my project explorer. But the way I go about creating a project is by going to Files, New, and then if you don't have this item, which is Dynamic Web Project, you can go to Other, or it might be called Web Project if you're running an older version of Eclipse. If you don't have that option, you can just basically choose Others and then scroll down until you find this folder, which is called Web. There you can choose Dynamic Web Project. Okay, please remember for this course, we will need to create dynamic web projects. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, create a new one. So we're going to call it JSP demo. JSP demo. Okay, here you can actually, if you want to make things simple, I need to tell you that when you download the Enterprise Edition of Eclipse, it already comes with Apache Tomcat. But if you want to use your own Tomcat, you can basically choose it here. You can go to New Runtime. And once you pick your server, you can actually then so you can see that I have already given the path, right? So my Apache Tomcat folder, which is in my library, is already given here because I have set it up before. And you can do the same thing. If you don't change this setting, Eclipse may use its older version of Apache Tomcat. Okay, so please remember that. The rest should be fine, so I'm going to go to next. So it's telling me whether to create a source file, which is my answer is yes. So I'm going to go to next. You can choose to generate a web.xml. If you click that, it will automatically make a web.xml file for you. And you can click finish. That's all. So you have the project on the left, JSP demo. And what you're going to do now is we're adding JSP files and servlet files, web.xml files, and so on. So what I want to demonstrate is I want to create a web application that passes some parameters to the server, and the server in turn will display them on the browser. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go to my source folder, and I'm going to create an HTML file. Okay, so I will just call it form1. Next, I'll finish here. Okay, so I already have this an HTML file here. All I need is to have one form, right? So what is the syntax here? Let me know if I make any mistakes. Okay, so we have form, we have action attribute, right? We should have another attribute, right? I think it's method. Okay, so this is our form. What I want to have is I want to have a first name, then I'm gonna have an input here, type. The type should be text, right? Then I have a last name, again, input, type. So there is something missing here, right? We need to have a name for this. Otherwise, we don't know how to refer to them. So name equals to txt first name. And this one, I'm going to name it txt last name. br, again, br. Okay, and finally, we will have an input. Type, this one will be submit, right? And we will have value here, right? Send information. Okay, so this is just a very simple form in order to demonstrate how to send parameters. And what do we need now? We need to have either a servlet or method. So can you tell me what should I write here? I have a question. What is the value of this method? What should I write here? Can anybody say?
Can I get or post?
Which one, get or post? Which one do you think is better? Because we don't have any important information here, you can do both, right? But if I had, for example, if I had a password here, if this was a password and the type would have been password as well. In that case, doing get is not a good idea for obvious reasons because it will be displayed on the browser and will be turned into post. I don't know if you guys know about action. We will come back to that just a bit later. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a servlet and a JSP. So first, I will create a servlet. Display parameters. Okay. Oh, sorry, not the package. Class name as display parameters. Go next. Next. You can choose what methods you want to override. Okay, so I only need do get, do post. Normally we don't override these ones. Okay, but if you want to, you can. Okay, so I'm gonna actually override them. You get to see the format. Okay, so here we are. There is something interesting here, and this is called a web annotation. Okay, web annotation makes it very easy, right? If you want to do web annotation, you have to import this class. Okay, so when you do use this web annotation, you don't need to create the web.xml file anymore. Remember, we had servlet name, servlet class, right? We had URL mapping, right? If you do it this way, you don't need to have the web.xml file anymore. This makes it very simple. Okay, so we don't care about the constructor. We don't care about the init. We don't care about other things. Okay, so let's just go inside the doGet method. Let's see where the doGet method is. Here's the doGet method. Okay, I don't need this line. Okay, I don't want to display this to the browser. I want to see how to receive parameters in servlets. Okay, so obviously the first thing we need is response.setContent. Okay, so this is important to write the content type so the browser knows how to prepare. So basically we're telling the browser that we are going to display our information in HTML. Okay. Then we have, we need a print writer, right? Out equals to response dot get writer. We will see how these things are easier done in JSP. Okay, so I'm going to import print writer here. In order to get your parameters, we will need to use the request object, and the request object is already here. Okay, the container passes a reference to the doGet method, so we have access to the parameters. We can say get parameter names, and you can see Eclipse makes it very easy. You don't need to remember everything. There's good things about this. There's also bad things. The bad thing is that you will never remember everything by yourself. You always depend on Eclipse. Okay. For the sake of simplicity, we're just going to stick with Eclipse for now. And when you say request.get parameters, you will get sort of an array of parameters. And for that, we need to use enumeration type. Okay, to receive these parameters. I'm going to have to import enumeration from the util package. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to have to print some HTML, okay? And we need to have a string file, which we'll set it to null. Later, we will get parameters one by one. We put it there. Remember, we talked about disadvantages of servlet. Here it is. We have to write HTML. That's not very convenient. Else.print ln get. We may want to have a title. Title is get parameters using a servlet. We close that one there. We close head. What else do we need to do here? Then we go back to writing Java. We need to have a loop to go through the parameters, okay? Because we don't have only one parameter. We have two parameters, right? That's why we will have a loop until there are more, parameters dot, until there are more parameters. We're going to get them one by one. So param, we have to convert it to string. Parameters dot next element. Okay. And then once we don't know the name of the parameter, so in this example here, the name of the parameter for the first one is txt name, right? But we also want to know the value here. And therefore, I'm going to say, so I'm going to print it out dot print ln. We put the name of it, param print ln, and then we add. It's not registering this for some reason. Am I mistyping it? Plus, what else do we need to print? Okay, just this one, and then we say, okay, now we want to get the value of the parameter, which we get it from the request object. Request.getParameter. We put param here. And we just add a break. Okay. What else do we need? Okay, we need to close the HTML, right? So first, outside the while loop, of course. First, I'm gonna close the body, right? And at the end, please remember to close your out object. Okay, do you think there is any syntax errors? If you see any error, please let me know. Are there any problems here? Can this servlet run without any problems? Well, the good thing is, if there are any problems, any syntactical errors, Eclipse will let me know. So I don't need to compile it myself separately. That's a good thing about using Eclipse. Okay. And this is our form. I don't think there are any problem here either. Okay, so I'm gonna leave this here and I will give you a short break for 10 minutes, okay? We will get back and we'll run this, we'll run another demo and we will continue with the rest of our slides.